And welcome, I'm James O'Loughlin, and welcome to the second TechLines panel discussion in which we look at the cloud. Now the cloud, through history, it's been a symbol of both good and bad, hasn't it? When you say the clouds are gathering, it usually means something bad is about to happen. But yet, Cloud 9 is supposed to be the best place ever, although I've never been there myself, except perhaps for one night many years ago, but it's probably not appropriate to go into too many details about that. I flew to Melbourne the other day, and as we took off from Sydney, you know, you get that wonderful view of the city gradually becoming smaller and smaller, and cars looking like toys and people looking like ants. And then we went into a cloud, and suddenly everything was totally unknown. Now, perhaps the cloud isn't as unknown as it was a year ago, and what we hope is that in an hour, it'll be even less unknown, that you'll understand what it is, how it works, what the advantages and potential issues are surrounding it, and have a better idea about how you may be able to use the cloud to improve things for you or your business, or alternatively, not use it. When there are many analogies that try and explain the cloud, and my favourite is electricity and the lawnmower. We own a lawnmower. We take care of it 100% of the time. We bought it outright. And I worked out the other day that we use it for 20 minutes every 3 weeks. That is, of the time we own it, we use it for 0.07%. 99.93% of the time, we don't use it, and yet we're still paying for it and feeding it and watering it and everything. On the other hand, electricity. I don't own an electricity substation. I don't even really know what it is. I don't own an electricity station or a generator. All I have is a switch. And when I flick the switch, I get electricity and I start paying for it. But I don't pay a cent when the switch is not on. That's kind of like the cloud. Of course, if something goes wrong with any of the electricity stuff down the line, there's not much I can do about it except wait for the power to come on. Now, joining us to discuss the cloud is, on my far right, your left, Mark Pesce, who's a futurist, writer, educator, broadcaster, panellist and judge on the ABTV series called, what is it? Oh, The New Inventors. Next to him is John Paulo Carrero, director, platform and developer of evangelism at Microsoft Australia, and I will henceforth refer to him as GP. Next to me on this side is Kevin Noonan, Research Director for the Public Sector at Ovum. He's also served as Chief Information Officer at Oz Industry. And finally, Glenn Whitewick, who is the Director, IBM Research and Development Australia, and Chief Technologist. Imagine how many technologists they have at IBM. He's the chief of them all for IBM Australia. Please welcome them all. And we want to hear from you. We're going to have a bit of a discussion, but then open it up for comments from the live audience. But also, if you want to tweet one in, it's hashtag TechLines. So a question or a comment are most welcome, and we will get through as many of them as possible. Now, what are we talking about? I liked my analogy, but what do the experts think? Mark, how would you explain the cloud?
Well, I started to think about this in terms of what I do with my own day. So I get out of bed, I trundle over to the office, which is next to the bedroom, and I open up the computer, and immediately my email starts flowing in from the cloud because I use Google Mail, I use Gmail. And I take a look to see what I have on today on Google Calendar. And then I pick up my phone, which is an Android phone, which means it's connected to Google's cloud. And I was looking at this yesterday, getting progressively more and more paranoid because I realized that I didn't have any of this. It was all coming to me, as you said about electricity, from somewhere that I don't really know. But it's coming all magically, and it works almost all of the time.
And yet a landline, the old-fashioned phone, is like that too, isn't it? You own the phone, but you don't own...
You don't own anything behind it, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I also think, well, I might blog today. Well, if I blog, because I had a server at home that I was running my blog off of that melted down a year ago, what I decided to do is to rent some space on a computer in Atlanta, which is in the cloud. It's a cloud in Atlanta, and I run my blog off of that. So almost everything I'm doing day to day that's concerned with connecting with the outside world is happening to me via the cloud.
So, GP, would you agree that it's possibly not as scary and unfamiliar as perhaps it seems?
Yeah, of course. And reusing your analogy with the lawnmower.
The big Microsoft guy is using my analogy. Right, good, on camera, very nice.
You don't only use your lawnmower like 1% of the time, But another way of doing it is you can actually hire the services of a landscaper. So then you change the relationship you have with your garden, where instead of operating the garden and cutting it yourself, you have someone who's a professional and doing it for you. So what you can do is you change the relationship in terms of, I need to do it, in terms of what is it that the garden should look like, and have someone doing it on your behalf.
So clearly you're implying I'm not a very competent lawnmower, something I always said I'm very good at it. Kevin, Wikipedia is there's an analogy there, isn't there?
Oh, that's right. I mean, there's a great number of examples of things that we use in our normal day that is really starting to creep in. You know, we have some clearly firm definitions that have come out of places like NIST and the like about what cloud computing is. But if you would start to stand back and look at the likes of Wikipedia and the things that we use in our normal lives, it's already encroaching into that. The idea of putting things out there on the net, you know, we all know about the likes of Facebook, and some people have been burnt by putting stuff out there on Facebook that they perhaps shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But we understand the issue, or we get it in our own head about security and the like. So why can't we translate those ideas into mainstream IT and use it in that sort of way?
Okay, so Glenn, then the question becomes, when we talk about the specific services that are being offered as the cloud now, how many of them are new, and in what way are they new?
They're kind of, in some senses, they're not new. You know, these things are being done for many years. You know, we've had computing systems to deliver all sorts of capability to organisations. What we're doing now, though, is actually delivering them as a service across the network, and that's kind of significant. And there's a number of different delivery models. We've been talking about public clouds. You know, there are people taking the same concept and implementing it inside their organisation as a private cloud. We can even do hybrid clouds where you can connect both. And there's an interesting...
Just flesh that out a bit, the distinction between public and private.
So the distinction between a private cloud is something that I might take this concept of a cloud computing, but I don't want to, for various reasons, I might want to do it inside my organisation. So I will instead of having, you know, separate servers, IT infrastructure, I'll pool all those resources together and make them available to whoever needs them inside the organisation.
Yeah.
So that's the idea of the private cloud. But then I can combine that with a public cloud, because I may not have all the resources I need, and sort of spill over and use public cloud resources if I need to, and that would be a hybrid cloud. And then there's some interesting models of community clouds where you actually deliver cloud computing resources to support some constituency, maybe all of the local councils, instead of having their own IT, you know, they could share it together and form a community cloud and deliver it effectively to all their organisations.
Right, and that possibly gives them a greater sense of security, that they still have control rather than it being right out there.
Yeah,
It's only a bit out there.
Yeah, so the thing is, it's really often a spectrum of choices that you have between cost and control.
Yep.
Usually the public cloud will be the most cost-effective way of accessing the cloud, but that's where you have the least amount of control, if you will, on what you get. If you have it locally in your private cloud, you will have a higher level of control on what it is, but usually you will have a higher level of cost. And it becomes the trade-off that you're comfortable in making between cost and control.
We'll talk a bit later about some of the concerns people might have with the cloud and what your response is, but just to flesh out the understanding a little bit more, who wants to have a go at telling me about infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, and business process as a service? The distinction between them and which ones are proving at this point the most popular. Glenn.
I'm trying to figure out how to kind of relate this to a lawnmower. I may fail dramatically. So we've started sort of bottom layer. I think people kind of get it, this concept of infrastructure. So a server that has some compute resources, some memory, some disk, and so on. You know, instead of having that beside me in my office or on my raised floor, you know, I can go and rent that. I can get that service out there in the cloud, and that's infrastructure. And then you're kind of responsible for it. Amazon have something called the Elastic Compute Cloud, and that's probably the most famous public infrastructure as a service cloud. So if you go up the next layer, you end up you're in the platform as a service, and that's where it's built on top of an infrastructure as a service layer, but it delivers a set of applications that you then might put your code, you know, the business applications you've written on that platform, and you get all of the advantages of the cloud. The next layer up is the software as a service, and that's kind of a good example of that is the Google Gmail. You know, that's delivering an email service to me. I don't I don't care about the software, I don't care about the infrastructure. And then you get up to a level above that is this concept of business process as a cloud. And that's where you might actually offer like an HR end-to-end service. You know, we'll do your payroll, we'll do performance appraisals, we'll do the whole thing, and we'll deliver that to you as a cloud service using all of those layers below it.
Okay, so GP, infrastructure is the easiest in a way, the first part, but are many organisations going all the way?
Yeah, absolutely. But I would think those layers in terms of who's the customers of those layers.
Yes.
Infrastructure as a service customers are the IT professional, people who are dealing with the disks and the servers and the things like that. Platform as a service customers are the developers. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a developer out there, I want to build an application. That's the layer I will be looking at. Or if the end customer of software as a service is the end user, your marketer, the finance analyst, the consumers, they want to have a finished application that they want to use through the cloud. So to me, it's easier to think about those layers in terms of who they're targeting.
Yep.
And then all of those layers provide value to the current target audience, and the adoption of those is different, but it's across all the layers.
Okay, so Mark, say I run a business, I've got a few employees, got an IT thing, big, small, IT department. It's all going all right, mate?
Right.
In what circumstances should I check out the cloud?
Well, are you working out of more than one location? Are you working globally? Do you need to have things up 24/7? Is your power supply reliable? Is your staff reliable? So the more questions you start to ask around this, the more reasons there may be to take what you're doing inside and then to put it out on the crowd. Do I need to be able to access it only within my facility? Do I need to be able to access it anywhere in the world? Do I need to be able to access it from mobiles? So there's a whole bunch of different factors that come into play here that the more things you ask your own IT department to do, the more complicated it gets, the more resources you're pouring in, and eventually it becomes a losing proposition. And then that's when you need to go, okay, wait, the cloud will solve these problems at a price, but it will solve these problems for me.
Are they going to, all the IT guys going to lose their jobs?
Generally, the IT department ends up managing your cloud for you.
Right, so then I guess the question becomes, Kevin, if you still need the IT guys to manage the cloud, where do the cost efficiencies come in? In what circumstances is moving to the cloud going to be cheap?
Cloud, there's some incredible efficiencies from the supplier side. Let's start from there. One of the interesting things that's happened to IT in recent times is that central processing becomes cheap. In fact, the bigger you are, the cheaper it gets per unit. So it means that if you're a supplier, if you can have a big data center or a big system or whatever, and you're able to break it up into standard chunks, it becomes extremely cheap. The interesting thing from a supplier side as well is that you can start to look around your customer base and say, what are the things that they have in common? And start to look at incorporating best practice. Now, from a customer side, for those of us who have been around in the service delivery parts of IT, you'll know the pain and suffering when someone comes to you and says, I'd like to talk to you about a new system, and we're going to reinvent a HR system, and we'd like to start with a blank sheet of paper because we're different. And you just groan because you think, I've done this 1,000 times before, and I know the next questions are going to be. And the advantage for cloud for customers is that you immediately have what you see is what you get. I was working for a small business prior to joining Ovum.
What, Oz Industry?
No. I was in a number of government departments, and then I moved out of government and worked for a small company. That small company, we had need for a customer relationship management system. Now, for a small company, you could go down one route and say, well, our needs are completely different to everyone else in the world, and we would like to spend the next 2 years designing one. Or you could go to a supplier of a software as a service. We won't mention names, but you know the one. You know the people.
I bet Glenn will.
and you go to them and you say, we'd like one of yours, please. And we had a workshop for an afternoon, and the next day we were productive. I even had it running on my iPhone the day I left that afternoon.
Really?
with it working.
Because some people might think, like, I've got a bookcase in my office at home,
Yeah.
and it just occurred to me the room would make more sense if I moved it over to the other wall and put it in, but I'm not going to do that. I can't be bothered. That's right. I'll do it in about 25 years when the kids leave home. Some people might think it sounds like a good idea, but is it going to be disruptive? Are we going to have to shut down? Is it? To change it?
Yeah, so and I wanted to just quickly go back, if I may, to the IT, am I going to lose my job type of questions. And I think this is a fundamental question to think about. And what I have a very optimistic view of the cloud from an IT function where it allows the IT to change the relationship it has with the business. As opposed to being an operator in lower value things like please make sure that it's backed up. You are actually now becoming a peer to the business, a consultant to the business, a strategist to the business in terms of what IT can do for you. So you remove the big chunk of my function, which is operating IT, and I can free that resource and working closer with the marketing department, the sales department, whomever you, to really understand what IT can do for you, and my role changes, and my value, and my perceived value changes within the business.
So you'd say, maybe, you don't have to mow as many lawns, but what you can do is think about the shape of the lawn more and other things.
And what's more valuable.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you think about the service, some of the services we talked about, doing email, for example, I work a lot with universities, and they've got thousands of students coming in every year, and traditionally they ran their own separate email systems for every different university. Rapidly they've moved beyond that because they realise that really doesn't differentiate the university. They've got to employ people, get someone who does this really well at scale with efficiencies, and so you're seeing a lot of them move to public cloud providers.
One of the other things that we don't want to overlook is when a software program needs to be changed. If you're doing it outside the cloud, then someone from IT basically has to go and install the program on every computer. Even if you have a system that pushes it out, it's not going to work on some of those computers. And we all know this is one of the dark secrets of IT. For some reason, there's some set of computers, it's just going to break. Yeah. And when you're on the cloud, it's magic. And you actually do the upgrade, and it's now working on all the computers because it changed in the cloud. It didn't change on the computer, on the person's desk. So it makes it a lot easier. So in other words, things don't fall over as often in the cloud.
Someone like you should really know it's not magic. It's highly evolved science. But getting back to that question of disruptive, how disruptive is the changeover?
I mean, obviously it depends. If you are starting out, you gave a nice example of a small business today. If we were starting a small business, I think it would just be a no-brainer to start picking the best of breed cloud technology and making use of it. If you've got an organisation that's got IT that's been running for 30 or 40 years, and hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars have invested in applications, it's not. There's some technical challenges of just sort of picking that up and lobbing it over into the cloud. So it's going to vary, and that transition cost is going to vary. I think what organisations are doing is they're kind of looking at their application portfolio and picking the pieces that make the most sense. What that application doesn't really differentiate my business from someone else's. It's amenable for translation or migration into the cloud, and they'll go down that path. And then the legacy applications, maybe will replace that over time, and there's going to be a set of work required.
And I take it by its very nature, if you start with that application, and that application, it's then not that big a deal to say I want that one as well, and we might not have that one for a while.
Exactly. You might, and there may be various reasons why you can't move this one. The data is too critical here. This other one, no problem at all.
And that's the big difference that for many of us who went through the IT outsourcing era, IT outsourcing was such a big decision. You're moving your data center and all the stuff that ran on it, and you were moving it to this company that we really haven't had a relationship with before. Cloud, and that can create some concerns about moving to cloud. Cloud is a different value proposition. You could start small, start simple, take your most least risk application, put it out on the cloud, try it out. If it doesn't work, what have you lost?
And we're seeing a lot of work, for example, in development and test. People writing code and building applications. That's just been a very logical workload that gets moved into the cloud.
Okay, in a moment we'll talk about some of the advantages, but also some of the perceived, at least, disadvantages. But first, Mark, how can connecting to the cloud actually change the way you do business? Are there things you can do that you could not do if you weren't connected?
I think the thing that it immediately gives you is it gives you complete geographic ubiquity, so that wherever you are in the world, you have access to the cloud. Whereas if you're talking about an old school IT infrastructure, you're only as connected as your infrastructure that you own is. So can you get in easy? Has it been highly secured so that people can't break in? Well, does that mean it's hard for you to get in as well? So when you move to the cloud, immediately what you do is you put it everywhere, and you also potentially put it on almost every device that's out there, because it's very easy for the cloud to be continuously available, but also to continuously keep up with new technologies. So whether that's a new tablet or a new phone or whatever it might be.
And of course, the change is a significant but subtle one for IT. That in the past, it was either good or a millstone, depending on your perspective. The fact that, whenever someone came to you asking for a new application, you had to start to think, now, I need to buy some servers, and that's going to take time. I need to do some applications design. Let's send them a business analyst. We need to do some maintenance and some tests and all of these sort of things. Let's run through all of that. And there's a great deal of complexity just to get the system out the door. If you can have the basic building blocks available through the cloud, the conversation within the organisation is different. It's now a partnership discussion saying, well, I know I can do all of those things. I know I can ramp up processing because we turn the screwdriver. I know I can get these applications because we already have them available in a certain way. So now let's talk about your needs. Let's talk about what I can do for you tomorrow, because it's generic, as opposed to highly customised next year. Which would you prefer?
And I think you talked about disruption, so I don't know if it's disruptive or evolutionary, but I think the change is more for the business than for IT. I think the cloud is an opportunity for the business to understand IT, because they don't have to understand the inner working. They just understand, as you just mentioned, what is it that I need from IT, and I want one of those. I don't need to understand how many servers it requires. I need to understand what type of software I need to buy. As a marketer, as a finance person, I want to have a dashboard. Give me the dashboard, and I can buy the dashboard. Give me my email system. I want one of those. So,
what about all my confidential data, some of which I might have legislative obligations to keep confidential, and suddenly it's not over there in a computer in that room, it's...
And this has been a big issue, because some Australian companies can't use the cloud because their cloud storage is not in Australia. And we're actually now starting to see cloud computing companies that are specifically located in Australia so that they can fulfill those requirements.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's, how confidential is this data? Do I have restrictions over this data being stored? How do I know that my data is truly secure? And we've seen, 2010 was a series of data breaches in all of the major clouds. Some of them perhaps by nations breaking into clouds, some of them by hackers breaking into clouds and stealing the information that's been put up there by organizations.
So how can you, if I had a service on my house where they said, well, you don't have to lock your door anymore, we'll come around and lock it for you, I would feel more comfortable knowing that I was responsible for locking the door, because the consequences of it being unlocked are big. Can companies that supply cloud say with utter certainty and truth that the data will be as safe as if you're looking after it yourself?
Well,
yeah. So the analogy sometimes I use is 100 years ago in the banking system. People were keeping their money under the mattresses because they did not trust the bank to store their money as good as they would do themselves. And that has shifted to everybody has their money in the bank.
Possibly depending on where you are in the GFC.
Went backwards a couple of years ago.
No, correct. But that's another very interesting analogy there if we take it to that level, where at some point there was mistrust or a lower level of trust of banks, and there was a run to the bank, and everybody wanted to withdraw that money. This is a little bit of the thinking you have to go through with the cloud. Do I trust the cloud provider to the level that I can have my data over there?
And there are certainly situations where there's going to be sort of legislation, privacy laws in various countries, which may, depending on the type of data, actually restrict you from having it offshore. But I completely agree. This issue of trust and service levels and dealing with reputable set of suppliers. I mean, you want to make sure that they're going to be able to delete the data when it's finished, allow you to get the data out if you want to move it to somewhere else. I mean, there's some important attributes here that I think the IT industry delivering cloud services needs to to be really diligent about.
And the organisation, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
And this is, I think, where Glenn's point about private clouds versus public clouds becomes important, because if these issues are really starting to crowd out your decision making, that's when you know you should be building a private cloud, so that you actually, it's out there, but you have control.
And ultimately, over 3 to 5 years, I think we'll see many of these issues that are kind of bothering people and concerning people today get addressed. So if you're starting out and building your private cloud, you do that in a way that you can support migration into a hybrid or into a more public cloud in the future.
And that, in a sense, is why we're starting to see in the Australian market the greatest movement has been in commercial private clouds. Right. So it's a neat, simple step of saying, okay, I trust a group of companies to outsource my stuff to a data centre or to my infrastructure outsourcer. Now, in its simplest form, would you trust that same company keeping their data in the same place, sending it over the same network, but we're just doing it at a click charge rate? Now, at its simplest form, that's about as risky as the decision gets. You can start to look at all sorts of options that include greater risk, including offshore and all sorts of other things. But if security is your absolute concern, go to your existing service providers that you have contracts with today and ask them, do you have a cloud offering? Because that's a straightforward, simple question.
Reliability is important too, GP. Are providers of cloud able to guarantee particular levels of service?
There is some financial backed up SLA that we can get from the cloud, but it's interesting to see the type of thinking that large enterprises go through, compare that to the thinking and the thought process that small and medium businesses go through. For small and medium businesses, the cloud is way better than they were today. So they're comparing something that Microsoft might offer or other company might offer out there with some level of trust and reliability versus a PC or a server under my desk. Clearly, the cloud will be better than what I'm doing today. For larger enterprises that have processes and security teams and data center in place, the conversation is slightly different. My belief is that ultimately, professionals and people have as a profession, the operating of a cloud will be better off than a lot of industries where their core competency is not IT. Their core competency is banking, their core competency is financial services or whatever you. For them, what is best is to think about how to create the best mortgage I can, or to understand how to create the best secure environment for my IT. My proposition is that they should be thinking more about their core businesses and start through the journey of trusting professionals in that particular
As long as they
matters.
do their due
No,
diligence.
of course, absolutely.
And I often think you touched on security, which is one of the things that gets discussed a lot. And I think your point is a very valid one, that if I've got a reputable cloud provider and they do this stuff, they implement security well and they do it at scale, they're probably going to end up being able to do that better in some senses than most organisations can do themselves. And we've probably all been in organisations where you could drive a bus through the security of their own internal IT. So what's sometimes perceived as a disadvantage, I think could actually ultimately deliver significant advantages.
And it is a sentence that I heard from a partner that I was working with. He said, you cannot engineer trust.
Yeah.
No, you have to earn the trust. So it's by being out there and having evidence of reliability, of security, and so on and so forth, that people will start embracing your model.
Right.
There's another element to reliability, which is that once you're in the cloud, you are entirely dependent on the reliability of the network.
Yes.
And the network is only as reliable as any of the weakest links between you and it. And that could be, whether you in the office and your link goes down, or whether you at home and your crap DSL goes down, or whether you're out and your wireless goes down. And so you always have to think that once you've pushed things out to the cloud, you have introduced another element that can fail.
And this is where I think, we touched on IT skills before. So instead of being responsible for the delivery of the individual pieces, I think the role of the IT professional inside the organisation is going to be able to, it needs to evolve to understand all of those elements and what risks there are associated with them in order to build
And what
resilient.
backups you can put into place.
Exactly.
And there is evidence of that where quite a few consultancy firms are creating this IT risk management practice or are growing the risk management practice that they have, because now IT is less about the delivery and more about the risk that I'm willing to take or not willing to take.
And when you move to the cloud, are you locked in? What if if after 6 months you think, whoops, no, not for me? Is it too late to change?
There's an interesting parallels and decisions that we've had to make with IT over the years. People have had to grapple with the same questions. If I buy this database system, am I really locked in? If I buy this customer relationship management system, am I really locked in? At the end of the day, these are all major decisions. Cloud is very similar. How far do you want to go? If you buy infrastructure as a service, backing out of a piece of infrastructure is relatively straightforward. If you're putting your major business systems out into the cloud, that's another scale of decision, and it involves another scale of risks.
And I would argue that we need to do more work in the IT industry to build standards to enable those sorts of things to occur. So today, to move stuff from one cloud provider to the other isn't simple yet. And as you go up those layers, as you point out, it gets more complex. So I think this is where things like standards are going to be critically important, because ultimately, if we don't deliver portability and the ability to migrate between cloud providers, that's going to be an impediment, I think, to people really getting on board.
What about, go on.
And here's the challenge for IT, in a sense, coming back to your original question with IT, is that in the past, we've have been the people with the screwdrivers in our hands. We make stuff happen. Now, there is no lesser job with cloud computing around. We just don't build the stuff, but we have to worry about security, reliability, the relationship with our suppliers, the relationship with the rest of the business. In a sense, it's even more complex of a job, but it's a different job. It's not the sort of job that we used to have when I started in computing, where we used to write assembler code. We don't do that anymore. We don't write assembler anymore. Similarly, we don't need to start writing detailed systems anymore. It's just one more step down the generations.
I used to think that only some businesses had seasonal variations, but then the GFC reminded us that every business can have seasonal fluctuations. Is the cloud good for businesses where there are peaks and troughs, Mark?
Well, and that's absolutely true. Amazon's Elastic Compute Cloud is the best example of this. And in fact, it's a very good example of this, in that if I suddenly turn out to have a flavor of the month website or web service offering, I can immediately buy as much computing power from them on demand. And so I could become the most popular website in the world and still be able to handle all of that traffic.
And then when it all ends,
bring
like
it all back in again.
Number one hit, you can bring it back in.
Exactly. And you see a lot of projects that get launched that turn out to be much more popular than they ever thought, and they fall over right away because people did not build them, say, in the cloud. So more and more people are turning to the cloud because they want to be able to handle that kind of success.
And that's kind of referred to as this elasticity. I can stretch it out, I can build it up, and I can let it come back as required.
But related to that is not only the elasticity element, which is very important, is the ability to fail fast as well. So the upfront cost being smaller, I can try more things.
Right.
And if I try more things, I will end up finding the gem that I can then scale very fast. And I'm going to be able to throw away the nine attempts that I failed with a very limited upfront cost.
Okay.
So there is a new competency that is starting to emerge in enterprises where they want to have a more rapid innovation team, where instead of having to buy 10 servers and so on and so forth in order to try something, they can try it very quickly, very cheaply out in the cloud, see if it works. If it works, they're going to pour more resources, sometimes even bring it back inside the enterprise, or just let it go. And that creates an innovation cycle that we didn't have before.
And I assume on your balance sheet there is a move away from capital expenditure to day-to-day operating costs. Are the accountants going to like that?
This could be good news for the accountants because the issue is that we have a lot of our costs of our IT is often seen as a cost. And a lot of that is due to us needing to buy large amounts of capital equipment that's there for predicted requirements. And it's really hard to have that discussion with your CFO. We believe that requirements will grow over this time, so trust me, we have to spend all of this money. Now, one of the nice and quite often undiscussed issues about cloud computing is that it actually exposes the unit cost of IT. Now, if you are buying IT services or infrastructure or software or whatever by the unit, you can have quite a different discussion with your CFO. You can say, our business is growing at a certain rate, therefore we believe that will drive usage at a certain rate, therefore this is the cost of IT. And it's a hard question to deny.
Right.
And
keeping that sort of cost and proportion to the business needs is, I think, the most compelling thing. It does raise a challenge, though, in that budgets and cycles and the way people have acquired capital before. That will have to change because if you're dealing with operating expenditure, and there's some classic examples where you can go and put this stuff on your credit card, so suddenly an employee comes back with, a $15,000 credit card bill because he went nuts on the elastic compute cloud. We have to deal, organizations are clearly going to have to figure out how to run with that.
And I think the other side of the coin here is that if you're a computer reseller, you also may be looking at a drop in your business because you're not going to be getting a firm buying 10 servers. So they're going to go and rent the space from Amazon or from Microsoft or from another cloud supplier. And so that constant need for computing equipment, which has really been a feature of at least the first decade of this millennium, is going to start to evaporate now. And so those companies that built their businesses around that may be in for hard times.
We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that also, even within the private clouds, it's going to have advantages, because if I can pool all of those resources together, instead of having to have separate servers that, as you point out with your lawnmower analogy, highly underutilized, I can even deliver that proportionate cost to a certain degree within a private cloud as well.
Because in fact, if I own 5 lawnmowers and rent it out to the neighbourhood, I might make money out of it. Yeah. And that's I think the attraction of cloud computing, is that there are enterprising people who can come up with, at the moment, cloud is the purvey of companies who can provide large amounts of infrastructure, software, hardware or whatever. But as we grow over time, there will be enterprising people who build specific tools, who will say, I can get 5 lawnmowers. I will start to offer specific point services that are available within that realm. And you're starting to see that the UK government, through its G-Cloud initiative, is talking about an app store, in a sense of, why do we have one agency creating ideas and doing things and not having other agencies able to just leverage that stuff that we've built? And if you join App Store and cloud together, it means that you can not only get it, but readily deploy it. And that's been always the tough bit. You can always say, well, yes, that's fine. Such and such a department has built this really good software, but it won't work. Yeah. I can't get it to work in my environment. But if it's in the cloud, it's going to work because it's in a defined environment.
We want to open it up now for your questions and comments. If you want to tweet something in, it's hashtag TechLines. I'd like to introduce at this point Brian Haverty from ZDNet. Hello, Brian. And
are we getting questions from the cloud?
Yeah, we're getting questions from the cloud. And Seamus Byrne from Lifehacker. Please welcome Seamus. They will be coordinating questions from the floor with their microphones and also from the cloud via their devices. So where should we start? Hands up if you want a question. We can start with you.
Well, I just brought one in that was kind of relevant to this from ZDNet a little bit earlier, about people calling for open cloud computing, referring to standards that would facilitate portability. Is this something that you see happening? Is it necessary with everyone's got their own cloud solutions?
The further you get up the stack, the less portable things become inherently. We're already starting to see companies that will allow you to port infrastructure around really easily. I mean, there's a company that announced on TechCrunch earlier this week that you can port into the EC2 cloud just by pressing a few buttons, and things like that are going to happen. But when you get all the way up to business process as a service, I mean, again, you want data portability out of those systems, but those systems may be highly custom, and the degree that they're highly custom, the less portable they are.
But I think to kind of also address the question you asked, the answer is yes. People are requesting that. It's a common set of requests. What are the standards, and how do I achieve that? And what I like to see, and exactly as Mark was pointing out, is that innovation can occur in this space, and people can actually build tools to enable the services to do that. And I, again, touches on GP's point earlier about some new innovation models that are occurring in this space, which I think is really quite exciting.
Yes, who is next? Right behind you, Seamus, there's someone.
I was just going to point to a question off Twitter. There's a bit of a trend in some of the comments that were coming through. I think one of the big things that people pointed to, and it kind of relates to both security and reliability, is the idea that, I guess, through all these layers of companies that potentially will be underlying your cloud infrastructure, that actually is both on the security question and the reliability question, extra points of failure that you might not even know about depending on who's providing the application. So I think people are still sort of thinking it's one thing to say that security is going to be okay, but how can people really feel that they can reliably know that this is really being looked after?
So to me, I go back to what I said earlier. I think you cannot engineer trust. You have to earn trust. So I don't think we're going to ever be able to show every single bits and every single line of cables that we're going to be using for providing that service. Just have to trust the company that provided that service that they can do it.
But there is going to be a requirement at a technical level to have infrastructure embedded within the cloud delivery stuff, so that if something goes wrong, I can see where the things have failed. And we have to do that in large complex IT environments today. We're going to have to do that in cloud delivered services. And again, it comes back to sort of standards. We're going to need to have agreed ways so that if my cloud infrastructure provider is here and my software provider is there, and my network comes in here and something goes wrong, that all of those things have the appropriate infrastructure underneath them to enable me or some other service provider to help debug and sort things out.
And I guess the other thing is that people get very used to, don't they, giving very personal, confidential information to their doctor or their lawyer or their therapist, or, the first time your doctor tells you to pull down your pants, you're thinking, well, what's going on? And then the 10th time, it's just normal. So I suppose it is about getting into habits of trust. But then again, that trust has to be earned, as you were saying.
But I think there is also a mindset in IT where we want to know the inner things in order to be comfortable, whereas in many other industries, you don't need to know the inner things. So taking the electricity, you're not going to ask Energy Australia or whomever there, say, hey, what type of turbine are you using? Because I only want my electricity delivered with that type of turbine.
Yeah.
You just take the electricity as it comes
Having
out.
said that, though, electricity, you can draw the electricity analogy only so far. It's a reasonably simple service, 240 volts, 50 or 60 hertz. The services we're delivering over cloud are far more complex, so I think we still need to have a level of infrastructure to support that.
Let's talk about this, because I think what we're really asking for is transparency. If we have that all the way up, and that comes back to the electricity question is, you said that my electricity is being generated green. Can you actually prove that for me? Can I actually know this?
Yeah, right.
And so it is the same thing. Can I know things are secure because everything up the chain is transparent?
And just to keep on the electricity grids, they're getting far more complex these days. It's not just a single generator and a single transmission network. We've got solar cells on people's roofs and cogeneration, and that is increasing the complexity of managing and running those electricity grids. So I think by analogy in the IT space, we can't avoid it. We should do it in a standard way with good transparency. I think that's the
And
right
that's
approach.
a good doctor. If you go, why are you tapping my knee? They'll tell you. And if they say, look, I'm the doctor, I'm doing it, you won't go back.
There are also a few unsung heroes of enterprise IT whose time may have come. Your security people, your enterprise architects, the people who worry about whether all the bits fit together. Really, organisations shouldn't take risks, unnecessary risks. But on the other hand, if you took no risk at all, you'd get nowhere. And we need people within the IT organisations who not only know about building stuff, and that requirement's going to diminish a bit over time, but the people who understand what risk is reasonable, their time has really come. We've talked for years about it all being about data. Well, now it's time for us to get serious about data, because we have to understand the difference between data that can end up overseas to data that we really don't want to end up overseas. And if we can differentiate that, then we've got a chance of doing different things over the cloud.
Yes, all right. Now, I saw the microphone being parked. Down there. Yes, off you go.
Hi, it's Glenn Elliott from Myriad Minds. So I had a question. How much do we think that the development of the cloud is driven by the end user experience? I mean, the end user experience is driven by some of the cloud leaders, Facebook being a classic example. The end user is used to a consistent application that's ever improving, that's always the same version as everyone else they deal with. Very, very different to what they might experience at work, particularly more old-fashioned IT setups at work. How can other cloud models, particularly private cloud, keep up with that sort of user experience?
I think you make a good point that a lot of computing, in fact, in the last decade has been driven, advances have been driven by consumers, by the devices we have and the experiences we have. And what we're seeing with cloud is a lot of that thinking then, people are recognising that, hey, I can do that. Why can I get such a reliable email service from home and all the kids use it and it works wherever I happen to be, and yet I still struggle with the email system that's been delivered to me by my IT organisation. So consumer stuff is absolutely informing in many areas how IT gets delivered within organisations.
And I think private cloud is a good stepping stone, but it's not the ultimate game. I think at some point there will always be a requirement for some sort of private cloud for data that will never leave my site. I can point to it. But more and more, as we become comfortable, we'll start feeling able to move things out further and further. But it's a question of the comfort factor, and I think you're right that it's likely to be the user experience that's likely to drive us.
But I think the thing we have to note is that the consumer has actually consistently been incredibly conservative. Every time Facebook changes anything, every time new Twitter, for example, changes anything, you can hear the scream heard around the world. So in fact, the consumer is actually being dragged into deeper integration with cloud services by people who are leading. And so I think that that's the tension, is that if you're going to build a cloud, feel free to drag your users along. I mean, do lots of user testing, but feel free to drag them along and drag them out of their comfort zone, because you're going to consistently need to do that in order to stay ahead.
Over here.
Yeah, look, hi. One of the things I do is I sit on the board of the Storage Networking Industry Association for Australia and New Zealand. And globally, SNEA has defined a standard for cloud storage. And that standard insists on data portability. Now, as it happens, one of the largest cloud backup firms in the world, Mozy, chose not to adopt that standard, and a couple of weeks ago completely changed its terms of service from unlimited backups for $5 a month to a more complex pricing structure. There were people who had hundreds of gigabytes, if not terabytes, sitting in the Mozy cloud, who are now faced with a service that's more expensive than they ever imagined, and they have no way to get that data out unless they download terabytes and terabytes of stuff. So when you guys say to me, don't worry about lock-in, it'll be portable, there are people out there who are currently experiencing a very different reality.
I wouldn't argue at all that that's not a challenge. That's a real big problem today, those sorts of things. And I think that exactly, guides why many large users of IT aren't migrating.
Doesn't it get even more complex when you start to build to an API offered by a SaaS vendor, and they then decide to go and futz with that API, perhaps in a very subtle way.
Futz. Is that a technical term?
Mess with that API, and all of a sudden, custom code that you've cut for your business is less reliable. But that's okay. We've got this utility model. You can live with that because they're so reliable and trustworthy.
Let's have an answer.
So those are obviously real issues that I don't think we have a full solution for. But I would argue that it's not a completely new problem. When you when you as an enterprise were relying on a startup for some sort of services because you wanted to tap into the innovative software of that startup as opposed to take the generic things out of the thing, then you also were taking the risk of that startup disappearing. So now there was a process back then that you had the code in escrow, and then you can actually look at the code and modify it yourself. Something that has never happened, but at least we were feeling good about having the code in escrow. We need to identify ways for companies to take those level of risk, tapping into companies that are less, the business continuity could be a challenge with, and understanding how this can happen. I would argue that a lot of the customers who use the company you mentioned could have thought about that ahead of time. When they put like 5 terabytes of data, did they know, did they have any guarantee that the service would not change? Did they know that things would not ever evolve. And what I want to do about this if it changes. They did not have a backup plan, no pun intended, for their backup system. So I think this is an evolutionary element of how we need to think about the cloud. The issue is real. I don't think it's new, though.
But I guess it comes down to being aware of all those things that weren't anticipated, doing your due diligence and getting, a lawyer who's used to thinking about all the terrible
and
things
in fact,
that can happen.
more like an IT professional, as we were saying before, the IT professional is going to have a set of skills to advise businesses on, this is a risk in this company. I'm not comfortable with the, with their level of maturity and the fact that they haven't agreed to standards. Ultimately, I think we'll be dealing with organisations that put their hand on their heart and say, we stick by the standards and we'll continue to work.
What we're asking, is the IT job going away? I think the IT job is evolving from the screwdriver to the person advising the business. And as an IT professional, I will be likely to earn more by advising the business than having a screwdriver in my hand.
But you may need a law degree.
We've got time for one more.
G'day. Sort of a two-part question. We've heard the word cloud computing being thrown around a lot. It sounds like the head of technology at IBM will know why it's called cloud computing. Just wondering if any of the panelists know why it's called cloud computing.
Okay, well, let's hit that one first.
Historically, when you drew a model of the internet, you just drew it as a big cloud. All right, so a computer connected to a big cloud, and so that's where it came from.
Correct. So with that, Mark, you said earlier, you had a blog with a server under your desk,
right,
and then that went under, and you decided to move your service into the cloud. Technically, I think they're both in the cloud. The server you had under your desk is in the cloud because it's connected to the internet, and where you moved it to is in the cloud. What's different is the service provider, and I think that that's a key to the success of cloud computing. Like, our emails are managed by Google, and we're getting awesome service. I'm sure if the provider was some new startup called Jerry's Email Services or something like that.
And your first question was so succinct. The second one's slightly longer.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a feeling of where we're at. So, it would be quite different. So, we noticed the day-to-day advantages of cloud computing all the time, but even like a week ago, we got into the office, half of it was flooded, lots of computers gone. We drive down to Officeworks, buy 10 laptops, 10 minutes later,
We are a
we're
bit
up
short
and
of
running.
time, so the question...
The question is, how do you evaluate? What is the set of criteria by which, for us, it's Google, we trust them, they're going to be good, they're reliable, they're scalable, they're secure. What questions can you ask of a cloud service provider to see whether they are the right people to go with?
Yes, thank you. Who wants to have a crack? Mark, what questions would you ask?
I guess I'd start with, do I trust them? It comes back to that question about trust. Do I trust them? Do they have a name? Are they fly-by-night? Do I know people involved? Have they had security breaches? What's their uptime? We haven't talked about this, but all of these things start to become a big thing, because if I have all my data up there and I can't get to it, my business
Can
is...
they answer all my what-if questions? What if this happens, what if that happens?
Yeah.
And presumably they'll have some sort of terms of service with some service levels in there. Are they active in the standards space in this area, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a set of criteria that I think will probably develop and become more mature over time at measuring capability.
Is one of the questions to ask, do you just reckon you'll do all this, or do you guarantee it with financial penalty if you don't do it?
Right. And particularly you think about where the delivery of that could be the other side of the world. Do you want to end up in a legal battle with somebody, worst case, that's in Delaware, or would it be better if the cloud provider was here in Australia and we could meet and sort it out?
It's just where all the American companies incorporate. Right. Let's get very, very weak corporation law.
I see. Before we end, I want one comment from each of you about something that may be to do with the future of the cloud, something you think's interesting about the cloud, something that all these good people can go away and think about a little bit. Mark.
Well, so I really started to think about what is it that differentiates my business from some other business that can now run exactly the same software and exactly the same services? What is my secret sauce? Because we're getting to the point now where the information that you're providing and the information that you're sitting on can be so distributed and so out there and can be available everywhere. You can be running a global organization. I could be running a global organization from my desk in Chippendale now, and I could just be doing it. So what is it that organizations need to take a look at what is it that they're doing that's so special that when everyone else has access to the same tools, and we're not far away from that, that means that they still have some advantage.
Very nice. GP?
To me, there are many things that come to mind, but one that is quite high in the list there is that we've seen the vast majority of current cloud adoption as a way of having efficiency in my operation. So the primary driver today is operation efficiency. And I think it's a slightly short-sighted understanding of the cloud, where we're seeing an emerging type of companies, startups in particular, that are looking at the cloud as changing and disrupting business models of other larger companies. So one thing that I could basically suggest to people is thinking about the cloud as an operational efficiency tool and take advantage of that, but going beyond that and think about what are the type of innovation I can create, how can I disrupt existing business models using the cloud so that I can create the next Microsoft.
Kevin?
I'd like to create another Microsoft. No, one of the, I've been running a number of workshops around the place on directions, and cloud clearly comes up. It's interesting that I found that the type of discussion people have is vastly different depending on whether they've tried cloud or not. When people haven't tried cloud, the discussion is about here's all the things that could go wrong. For those who have, it's still about here's all the things that could go wrong, but it's quite specific to my sector, my industry, the things I'm doing today. And it's about differentiating, for all of the things we need to worry about, what are the things that I need to worry about today? So my message is, have a go, start at something that's low risk, small, tightly controlled, and just start to get a feel for it.
Then at least you'll know what you have to worry about.
At least you'll know what you have to worry about, so when you're laying awake at night, you know why.
Yeah, great.
So I was thinking about this, this kind of question of cloud adoption comes up, and I think we had some good discussion today where, we see places where it's immediately obvious and there's other areas where more maturity has to occur. But if you think back sort of prior to the internet where computer networks existed, they're often very proprietary and everyone was out there kind of, spruiking their wares. And then suddenly this, standard-based internet exploded, and no one would think today not to do business on it, not to use it. I mean, there's challenges, we have to deal with it. But so if we think forward, 5 or 10 years, I think we'll be having a very, very different conversation, and cloud will be sort of baked into the fabric of computing at all levels.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panel, Mark Pesce, GP Carrero, Kevin Noonan and Glenn Whitewick. Also, a big thank you to ZDNet and Lifehacker for making this possible. Please thank them. And thank you for watching, whether it's live here in the room or perhaps via some device connected to the cloud. Goodbye.